So we are here to tell you a love story that we actually saw ourselves. It's about our friend Matt, and you can see him right here with his sweet hi Samantha. He wanted to spend a romantic weekend away, except actually it wasn't so romantic because he wanted to spend a weekend away with 300 other developers writing code. The real problem was that the weekend he wanted to spend was Valentine's Day weekend.
Yeah, but Matt had an idea. His sweetie likes music, and he wanted to create a website that would allow him to create a personalized playlist that would match all of her interests. So he types in, what she likes, and it would go out and find all these songs that match the same thing. And he thought, wow, this would be a really great thing to give to my sweetie.
And then he wouldn't be in trouble.
Right. There was only one constraint, is that he had to build this in 24 hours.
So he had a couple things on his side. One of them, of course, was Django, the web framework for romantics with deadlines. And the other one is his team.
That's where we come in. So Anna Callahan, iPhone OS extraordinaire, jazz trumpet player.
And Nate Ani, who is a Django Python clone dude, and also a saxophonist.
Yeah. So in an event in New York City, took place back in February, Valentine's Day weekend, and the event was called Music Hack Day. And this is not unlike the sprints that you're used to at Python and other conferences, where you basically have like 24, 48 hours to build something. And this particular event had prizes, and lots of hackers and musicians came, and it was a really, really fun event. Very intense. We didn't get a whole lot of sleep. And the culmination of this for Matt was the creation of an app that we ended up calling Valentines.
So we're going to show it to you. Nate's going to talk you through it.
Yeah, so this is the web version. You'll have to ignore the fonts.
It's the most beautiful site you've ever seen.
So we're going to just log in here, and here's where we type in, our Valentine's name and what she likes and what her cell phone number is, and a little short message. And then what happens is it goes up to the music match database and pulls down songs that have lyrics that match those. And then you can just check off which songs you want to send to her. Let's pick Led Zeppelin, The Clash, U2, and then you can either share a link, in which case there's a permanent URL that you can send to the person who has a little playlist. And you can, of course, click on one of these songs. Oh, we didn't click it. So that's basically the web version. Pretty cool. But we thought that's not enough. We still got a few hours left in 24 hours. And Matt said, I got to do something really good for Samantha, my sweetie. Like, a web version is just not enough. We got to do a mobile version too. I should talk about the procrastination. You might be on a train and you're not by your computer, and you have to send. Valentine's Day is almost over, so you only have like a few hours. You might want to send your Valentine's card for your mobile.
So, just a little more seriously, if you're not developing for mobile now, actually, how many people here have developed an app that reaches out to a mobile phone that has an API to mobile? So some people, yeah. It is definitely something that you should think about. It's a good skill to have. There are a ton of mobile apps, and people are using mobile apps on their devices more and more, and less, using the browser less and less.
As of June 2011, the time that people are spending on mobile apps exceeded the time people are spending on web apps.
So what is different about mobile? There's a little star at the bottom that says, this is the case when you or your customer controls the mobile app. So there are two cases. We gave this talk at DjangoCon, and I got some great questions. What we're mostly talking about is when you have control over the mobile app that's being built. There's a more generic case where you are Twitter, and you want to build an API for any number of third-party mobile apps. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but right now we're not talking about that. We're talking about the much more frequent case, which is there's a company that has a successful web business and they want to build a mobile app, and it's going to be proprietary to them. So you're really building an API to map one web app to one mobile app. Developers will often ask, like, isn't REST appropriate for everything? We have this generic REST API, and why don't we just use that? Don't I want a single API for all of my HTTP clients as well as all of my mobile clients? And I kind of assume that people know what REST is, but just for a little refresher, when I talk about REST, I'm not talking about generic resource REST. I'm talking about specifically the ones that are built in the APIs that you get with either Django or with Ruby on Rails. And it sets up a very specific pattern that you use to reach those resources, either a collection of resources or a specific element. And you create with post, you retrieve with get, you update with put, and you delete with delete. So there are two technical reasons why mobile is really just different from your other clients. The first is that connections are slow, spotty, or non-existent quite often. And you can never rely on a connection. And the second reason is that mobile is just, it's really not as powerful as, you know, the machines that we're accustomed to working on. It's very small. See? It's a small device, and it is not as powerful at accessing the database or doing calculations. The first thing that you want to do whenever you're building an API is write an API doc. Because if you don't write an API doc that is very clear and contains everything, one of you will write code that will have to be rewritten, and nobody likes that. So when I create an API doc, I usually include these three sections. The first is an object section, and we have like an overview, and then we'll often go into each object and like exactly what the attributes are and everything. The API calls, and this is kind of the meat of the doc. You just go through each call, and you can even, I often have specific flat JSON for a return. I'll have an example JSON that I put in the doc, because what that means is that even if, you know, anything else can be true in here, but if we both build to that flat JSON file, then the API should work fine on both ends. And then an error code section that we'll talk about a little more later. So here are some specific things you want to think about when you are building your API. You want to return hierarchies of related data. So we'll talk about this next in a couple of slides, but because your user may go into a tunnel at any point and lose connectivity, you don't want to require them to make multiple requests. You want to think about authentication and authorization. You want to have mobile-specific error codes and messages, and we'll talk about that later as well. You should accept arrays of related or unrelated data. Mostly are related, but there are cases where you want to accept arrays of unrelated data as well. And you want to return pre-calculated data or data that doesn't exist on the device. You don't necessarily replicate the entire database on the mobile device, so there are some things that you will want to return that you can't store on device.
Okay, so talking about hierarchies of data. In our particular example, the Balance app, we have basically two data models. We have cards and we have tracks. And here we're looking at it very linearly. Really what you want to be thinking when you're talking about mobile is sending back to stuff in hierarchies for the reasons we just mentioned. So looking at our, we're going to show a Django code example here. Looking at, this is our card model. This is the Valentine's Day card that you're going to send, you know, the recipients, their email, their phone number, a little note field. Pretty standard. And our track class also has things like the name of the track, the music brains ID, the name of the artist, the URL where you can get the actual MP3 file. Also pretty standard. And we used a library called TastyPie to build the API. It was our first time using it, so we had a lot to learn in a very short period of time. And I'm happy to say that to build a really simple REST API using TastyPie is but this much code. you just make an API.py file, and you define resource classes. So I have a track resource and I have a card resource. And you can specify a name. If you can leave that off, and it will just lowercase the name of your class, and that will become the endpoint. And that's pretty much it. This will give you basic CRUD operations through the API. Then, of course, you have to add in your URLs.py file. You just add a regex pointing to the card resource, and that'll generate all the URLs for you. And then, once you've done that, you can access your resources just by this is a post operation. And this will return JSON with the resource URI pointing to the card. So this is great because I've got the card coming back, but what about the tracks, right? When I fetch a card, I also want to get the related tracks because my phone might go into the tunnel, and I'm only going to have the card. I won't have all the related tracks. So I want to do one operation.
We haven't even created the tracks yet at this point because we're not accessing this through the website. We're only accessing the cards through the API. So the API, all it's done is create a card resource. It hasn't created any of the tracks.
So it wasn't immediately obvious to us how we would do this, but thankfully we hopped on the TastyPie IRC channel, and Daniel Lindsay, the maintainer of TastyPie, was there, amazingly just helping us left and right as we had problems. And he said, okay, you got to look in resources.py and override the post_list method. This is the default that comes with TastyPie. And this will create the objects when you do the post request. So what we did is we overrided this, and we added a couple things here. One thing that we added was we wanted every track to be associated with the user that logged in. Right? Otherwise, it just creates as a track. The card, every time you create a card, we wanted to associate that. So we passed in the user. The other thing that we did was we fetched the tracks and the URLs of the tracks. So this is happening in the post request. And then the last thing that we did is that we called the full hydrate method, which is going to return not just the cards, but it's going to return everything. So
Reinstantiate that object.
So now what we get from our request is we get this, or this is what we want. We want to actually return a hierarchical data showing both the card and the associated tracks. So with TastyPie, this is really easy. This is also something we had to read the docs and talk to Daniel about. But basically, you have this fully true. And what that does is it goes and it grabs all the related resources. So because we said that tracks are related to the cards in our data model, it knows that it should return the tracks in the track set. Any questions about that? Okay. So authentication and authorization. This is also really easy to do with TastyPie. Here we are looking at our card resource model. And authentication, as you all know, is basically letting the user in the door, right? Does this person have access to come into the house? Once they're there, what can they do? So the authorization, this is basic authentication. You just specify I want my authentication to be basic, and then it uses the Django authentication for actually figuring out what they can do through the API.
But there are other authentication authorization methods that you can use for mobile. Sometimes people prefer to just make one basic auth call that's an authenticated call, and then from there on they send back to the mobile device an auth ID and an auth token, and they store those on the device. And what that lets you do from the server side is you can basically create like a session. You can deauthorize that user at any time, so you can give them a time limit, and that way you sort of have control over that user a little bit more than you did before.
Okay. So the other thing that we needed to do is when we first were going and fetching all the cards, it was returning every card that was ever created, not just the cards for that particular user. So in the card the get object list method, we basically did a filter. So we pass in request.user, and that will return just the cards that belong to that
that you can give yourself more control over the mobile device if you authenticate using a sort of session method. You want to add control over the device anytime you can. Often the development cycle for mobile is a little longer than it is for the web, and that's not really for any reason related to mobile. It's simply related to the fact that the App Store, the iPhone App Store, can take up to 2 weeks or longer to approve of your app. So that just adds a lot of time. And also that most of the time it's an existing website building a mobile. So you may have a consultant. And for those reasons, it's nice if you can put some control in so the website can control the mobile device whenever that's possible. One way you can do that is with error codes. When you return your API, you first of all never want to return an HTML. So anytime possible, you want to return JSON. If you can, you want to tailor your response codes to actions on the device. I'll go into a slide in a minute that goes into more detail. You also want to return messages that are designed for the end user. So if you decide you want to just change an error message, you don't have to update the app and wait for the App Store. Here are some examples of actions on the device that are mapped to codes. So this is what you put in the API doc. If you want to show an alert and include a user message, then you would give this particular alert. If you want to show a certain type of alert and just log something to the console, then you can have a different code. If you want to have code to not alert the user but send information back to the server, you may want to know, how did the app get into this state? Is there something about the app or the device that we want to know about? So you can send that information to the server. You have something to try again. You have something to push a web view and point it to a URL. So if you do this, then you're asserting some control over the device.
So again, it wasn't immediately obvious how to do this with KC Cloud. But again, Daniel and IRC came to the rescue, and we were able to basically override what's called the wrapper method. And here, instead of doing an HTTP response, we pass the JSON response, and here we can just have a JSON string. It has an error code, and it has a message. This is for a bad request or an API field error. If there's a validation error, we can also return appropriate code. And then the last one is if there's like a status code error or some other kind of random error, we can assign different error codes for that. So this is very easy to do once you know the right place to look. This is the iPhone side.
And here's my one Objective-C side. So you can see how what I'm doing on the mobile side is you can have one function this way and just say, do this based upon the error code that we received. In that first one, we can raise the login view controller and have the person re-log in. Whereas in the second one, we're just going to show an alert message. We can always pass that through from the server to the mobile device. So it makes it really easy on both sides.
Okay, so we've been showing a lot of code examples. Now we want to show you kind of what the end product looked like for the iPhone version. So this is a short little screencast.
We get to log in. And I think on this one, I'm logging with garbage right now. So once I try to send information to the server, it's sending back this thing saying, no, you need your user to log in again. So here we log in with the correct information, sending that off to the server. The server is going to return from that API call with all of my tracks. I store those in the database locally. We can play the tracks, although I don't know if this is just returning the URLs, and then we can use those to play those tracks. And then from here, you go ahead and put in the 2 phone numbers. You can put in a little note. And this all gets sent off to Twilio. And Twilio then calls the phone, calls your 3D's phone number, and plays the note, speaks the note in a robotic voice, and then plays the tracks over the phone to your speaker. It's very cute. Oh, and I almost missed it. Here, I'm listing all of the Valentunes that I have sent under my username, whether I sent them from the mobile device or from the website. And this is the case that we're talking about when we talk about sending hierarchical sets of data instead of sending flat data. So what we want to receive is all of the cards and all of the track information that's a subset within those cards, instead of making the device request, the list of 6 cards, and then for each card select the tracks. Go and request the tracks. So here are the other things that I suggested in a little more detail, and these are not in our app, but I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of examples of those. It's really common, and I do it all the time. I get on the subway, and then I open an app, and then I use it, and I close the app before I get off the subway, so I'm almost never connected when I'm using that app. When you're doing that, let's say I'm playing some game, and I am racking up points, I'm getting awards. This is all stored locally on the phone, but every time I do one, it tries to send to the server and it fails. So you need to be able to send arrays of data to the server instead of sending them one at a time. I'm basically going to save all of my points and rewards and stuff in my database. I'll flag them as not being sent yet, and then we'll send them off. So, for example, we want to be, in that case, I might want to send 2 arrays in the single call. And you can split them into 2 calls if you want to. It's not really a big deal. But for sure, you want to be able to send arrays of data instead of single data in a post call. The classic example of data not stored on the device is leaderboard data. Normally, you only want to store one user's data on the device. Even if you get everything there is to know about that user, even if you download all of their data to the device every time you open the device, which is common, you don't want to store the other 10,000 users on that device. So to get leaderboard data, you have to make a call to the server, and you have to get some calculated data. So in this example, let's say you're competing with your friends. You have an app and it wants you to compete, and you're going to show daily statistics on people, on how many tweets they have sent. So what we want to return is an array of users, and each array is going to contain an array of days. So we're not talking about anything on your database, and it needs to be customized. And those days will contain the number of tweets, the number of mentions, etc. So it'll look kind of like this. And then the device will be able to portray that in the way that it wants. But this is kind of the stuff that we're talking about when we're saying that you need to be able to return pre-calculated data and data that doesn't exist on the device. So that was all basically when you control the mobile app. But there are cases where you don't control the mobile app. You might want to design your site with an API that is much more generic. And I've actually thought a lot about this since I wrote this slide in the last 24 hours. And so I have more information on that we can certainly talk about. But in general, some things that you want to do is allow your clients to set a depth level. So if you are requesting articles from a blog, you can request the blog, and if you want to get the articles, you can say depth level number 1, and it'll include all of those. Or like for us, the cards and the tracks. You request a list of cards. If you want to receive the tracks, you say the depth level is 1. And then you can create some special extended calls that encourage your third-party apps to do something that you would like them to do. For example, you can encourage them to use social networking by putting in some leaderboard calls that return any calculated data that they might want to compare their users on if they're doing leaderboard.
Okay, so at the end of the 24 hours, our friend Matt, he'd been up all night making Red Bull, but he was thankfully able to send a card to his sweetheart Samantha on Valentine's Day. She was great. So that's all we have. Thank you. We just want to say thanks to our accomplices at Music Hackney and Matt, of course, our fearless leader, Alexander. We did a lot of the Twilio integration. And by the way, we didn't really talk about Twilio. We were going to give a demo of that, but with the internet going up and down, you kind of have to have internet connectivity. So if you'd like to see it, or if there's time, I can show it. It's a really cool service. They have a great Python library, and you can create all kinds of phone-type applications where you set up a conference call, you can call people, you can do text messaging, you can do menus on the phone, all sorts of cool stuff. And Jeff and Tom also helped out. And we can't forget to throw a big thanks to Daniel Zilla, who's his IRC name, Tasty Pie author, for just providing incredible support when we were under very tight deadlines trying to get all this done. And Isaac Kelly also kind of jumped in at the last minute and helped us out. So with that, I think we'd like to take questions. We should mention that if you want to look at the code, it's all on GitHub. The Django code, the iPhone code, and the Twilio integration is all in 3 different repositories. Since all three of us were working concurrently on these different parts, and at the end they all had to work together. It's kind of crazy at the end as we're approaching the deadline. And we've also just want to mention a couple other frameworks that we did use. So TCPy is the one that we chose because they have great documentation. They have great support on IRC. But if you're a Django developer, there's also Django Piston, which has been around a long time. And there's a new one that Tom Christie is working on. He's here at the conference called the Django REST framework. I think he's sprinting on it. So if you want to do more with Django REST, come to Sprint. And want to talk about your platform?
Yeah, I just did this I posted it half an hour ago. Last I was here half an hour ago, so I posted it 45 minutes ago. But there's a little more information there. It's currently very ugly, but I'm going to clean it up. And then there's information on the 2OS, and that is it. So if you have questions.
Yeah, so we all want to make a great website and then deploy to as much platforms as possible and take over the world, etc., etc. So you now chose just for the iPhone. So you also mentioned that the market is shifting from users using browsers to using the apps. But I recently learned there's something called jQuery that makes it very handy for mobile browsers to use all the nifty stuff that you can do with your handheld smartphones. What's your opinion on that subject?
I've always been really surprised that HTML5 is not being used more, and that basically cross-platform development is not the norm. It isn't. I think that you should. So some of the things you want to be careful of is that there are lots of ways that you can build apps. And there are lots of ways you can even build cross-platform native apps. So there are all these different frameworks that you can use. And those frameworks are good for different things. You want to be a little bit careful because often the performance is not as good on the HTML5 based apps as it is on native apps. So I think the best idea is to use each framework for exactly as good as it is, and until you get to the point where, you know what, that isn't working for me anymore, or it doesn't contain the specific integration with the device that I need, and then you move to the one that maybe is not cross-platform or takes longer to develop in, or other things. I know Emily Toop is here, and she has done a lot of work in, she does Android and iPhone, and also has done PhoneGap and some of these other ways that you can create cross-platform and HTML5 apps and native apps and stuff. So I always thought that it would be the cross-platform. I thought 2 years ago I thought cross-platform stuff was going to be the norm, and it just isn't. So look out for those things, but use whatever seems to be the right thing for your particular site.
Other questions?
It's like a lot of things really useful if you're sending data
Or but addendum, that's a question. I found that always making sure that your server is capable of receiving gzip data requests as well for mobile applications, because if you've got a lot of data, if you're doing that hierarchical data structures, and you're sending an awful lot of data, to be able to do that zipped can save an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of processing. And all the iPhone libraries and the Android libraries handle it really, really easily. So, yeah.
You had mentioned earlier, never send HTML, but you didn't say why. I presume I know the answer, but
So why never send HTML? If the device is expecting JSON, then it's just very clumsy to deal with HTML. It's much easier if you simply accept JSON and you send the appropriate error code saying this is what happened, this is the error that happened. Whether it's an error, usually the reason that you send back an error code that's in HTML is because you had some kind of application error. But even those we can, if we can't reach the server, we'll get a timeout, and if something happened to your application and it crashed, it's still better to receive a JSON error, because most of the time when I receive an HTML error on the phone, it's like thousands of characters stuff, and it's just not, it's not feasible to go through that programmatically. So.
Yeah, just a specific question about the error code you were talking about. Was that the HTTP error code?
No. In fact, so, yeah, that's a good question. It's perfectly fine to send back regular HTTP codes for success, for error, for anything you want. The problem is that they aren't always enough. So if you get a 500 application error, that could mean a lot of different things. And you may want to have your app do something different in different cases of a 500 error. So I always find that, yes, sending those back for a lot of things is great, but you want to have some additional error codes that you make up, and I often just put a negative sign behind because it's not going to interfere with anything. That are tailored towards actions on the device. And you just make them up to be anything.
People want to see the Leo stuff. It's sort of working, sort of not working. Okay, we'll try to be.
I'm sure that you have to log in over there.
Oh, really?
It's possible that you just
Oh,
the login page open.
but you only have to log in to use the Wi-Fi. Oh, okay. All right. So again, our beautiful font selection. Okay, so your phone ready? All right. So who's missing their sweetheart?
This week,
This whole week.
lots of people.
Patrick, what's your sweetheart's name?
Frank. Foxtrot Romeo Alpha November.
We've got four names, he's spelled it.
Foxtrot, Romeo, Alpha November.
Foxtrot.
Alpha.
Alpha. N. Fran. Okay. What is she like?
Brazil.
Brazil.
Okay. And you have to pretend that this was yourself.
Yes.
I could call her right now.
You cannot.
Okay. All right. So this is probably not going to work. Way too expensive. But you know, hope I remember to remove the PDP set trace. It might still be in there.
It's okay if it's not her phone, she can still watch the video.
You can watch the video. Okay, here we go. So let's send a phone call. Normally you'd be able to check your tracks, but you disable it. All right, so your phone should